Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 15th. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with a little bit of a different segment. We're going to talk about just all the good things in college football. I feel like I've been covering a lot of the question marks and a lot of the dysfunction around the sport, but I want to just take a second, remind you all why this sport is so special to all of us. Then we'll get into a little bit of scheduling info that has started to leak out over the last couple of days. ESPN's full slate for the first Week 0 and Week 1 have come out. Also, some Ers and Ahs from Big Noon Kickoff and the Big Ten on CBS for the very first year has made some decisions that I want to break down for you all. Then we'll get into some new rivalries that I think are going to be coming our way with Realignment. Obviously, we are losing some that are going away due to teams leaving their conference, but I do think we're going to be able to backfill those with some very new ones that I think can be as aggressive as the ones we just lost. It'll just take a little bit of time to get there, but want to break down 5 for you all that are really standing out to me. Then we'll get back into spring overreactions. We'll go back to the Big 12, a little part 2 here. Probably we'll have a part 3 on Friday, if I'm being honest, because this does not even scratch the surface of the teams that I want to touch on. So we have Oklahoma State, Kansas, Colorado, and Baylor for you today. And then we'll finish it off with a Spotlight Wednesday, and we'll talk about the Florida State Seminoles. A ton riding on this year. DJ Uiagalelei is the hinge point. Point blank period. So we'll break that down. But before we get into all of that, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, maybe have a fun back and forth with me, maybe call me out on something that I didn't say that I probably should have, definitely use that tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen. It gets you to the top of the queue. Make sure that I can see you on the screen and we can kind of shout you out a little bit throughout the show. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net if you have any questions or comments. But let's jump right in and let's talk about this energy that has been around college football for the last little bit. I have been doing this show for probably about a couple of months now. I think about 2.5 months. And when I look at, the things that I've done, been very, very proud of some of the content that I put out there. But the reality is a lot of it has to do with the dysfunction in college football, everything that is changing, everything that is going away from this sport in the transfer portal, NIL, conference realignment, take your pick. There's a million different things that fans are very, very worried about that obviously you want to cover, and I will continue to cover on this show. But I felt like we should take just a second because a couple more things have started to come out over the week, and we'll definitely get back to those over the next couple of days. But I felt like it's good for everyone just to take a second around this time of year when everything is kind of at a lull to remember what, this sport is and why it is so special to all of us. So, you have conference realignment, you have losing some classic rivalries, you have players moving around and you feel like they're just not, you can't make connections with those players. You feel like players are just worried about the money and they're not worried about, the actual team they're going to or any of that type of stuff. And I kind of want to push against that just for a second here. I think the biggest misunderstanding to me when we talk about NIL is that is the end-all be-all for the majority of kids out there. And I fully understand that there are a number of kids out there that use that as probably the number one thing that they look at when going into a program. I fully understand that. I don't think that's necessarily the wrong way to go about business, but I prefer the other way. I'll put it that way. I do think that all of that considered, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think the majority of kids out there are just looking for NIL money. I think there's so many kids out there that are still in this for the right reasons. They still just love the sport. They want to go somewhere where they feel comfortable, where they love the coaches, where everything just feels like they're in the right place. They'll stick it out if they need to. We saw Carson Beck has taken the reins, and that's a great example of someone who waited his turn, and now you look the way that Georgia fans talk about Carson Beck, it is the most glowing thing you've ever seen. And it's the same thing that happened with Stetson Bennett where, yeah, he did transfer out, but he came right back because that's where he wanted to be. He wanted to be a Georgia Bulldog, and that's something that, resonates with fans. And I think it's something that we're going to see, honestly, more and more of as we go throughout this transfer portal era where maybe you'll have a guy that transfers early on in his career. Like a great example is Quinn Ewers. He came over from Ohio State after, being there for probably about 5 months. I think he showed up in August, was gone by, January. So was not there very long, was not around on Ohio State's campus for very long. But then he made it to Texas, the team that, he was a fan of when he was growing up, a team that was very much in on his recruitment and he was committed to prior to all the craziness with Tom Herman and that coaching turnover. But ever since then, he has been a Longhorn. Pretty much the second that he stepped on the campus, every Texas fan knew that this was our quarterback. He is going to be the guy, and we want him here. And he has not flinched a second. And he is going to be a Longhorn for the next year, and he will be for the rest of his life, because when fans are able to become attached to these players, it just means that much more when you watch them on Saturdays. And I think that all plays into the NIL and the transfer portal space, because you want those stories out there. You just do. You want to be able to look and say, that guy has been on my team for 3 years. He's gone through a lot of the same things that I went through when I was, in college and going through the same thing. And it's what binds us at the end of the day in college football. The reason that we all sit down every single Saturday and watch a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds run around on the football field is because they're wearing the same colors that we are. It's because they chose the same school that we did, and they chose it in a lot of reasons for the same reasons that we did. They chose it because they love the atmosphere. They chose it because they love the college town. They chose it because they love the people there. And I think that's something that with NIL and the transfer portal and all of this different stuff, we've kind of just decided that doesn't matter at all anymore, and I just don't believe that to be true. Mac Brown had a great quote when he was being interviewed by Josh Pate, where he just said, everyone keeps telling me that all these kids are making decisions for NIL alone. They're not. That's just not the way that things work. These kids make decisions off, all of the variables. Some, use NIL to a bigger degree. Some hold more weight in that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the end-all be-all for these kids. I think when you look at what these kids are under right now, just from a perspective of having to understand everything going on around them, having to weigh all the different factors that go into going to a school, it's a really, really tough thing to do, and I think they've handled it really well. Now, all that being said, our sport is different, and it's hurting in a number of different ways, and there are solutions that just need to come very, very soon. But to me, I've said this pretty much from the beginning of the playoff expansion and all of this different changes that have started to happen over the last couple of years. The one thing I've said over and over and over again is, if you keep my Saturday the same, I will not be mad. There is no reality that could, take me away from this game, is as long as that Saturday is untouched. As long as I can, wake up at really early in the morning with a little bit of more pep in my step, as long as I can go to tailgating and enjoy the time and get into the game, and then go into an organized mob for 4 hours and lose my mind over some kids that are playing a game. All of that is what we love about the sport. We don't necessarily love, the recruiting battles. We don't necessarily love the behind the scenes shady dealings. All of that stuff is not great. But there's a ton of stuff on the surface of this game that are still college football, that are the exact same as they were a decade ago and are not going anywhere. I think a lot of people are worried that, once one thing goes, everything is coming after it. I don't think that's the case. There's no reality, at least in the near future, where the second or the first weekend in October, a ton of Oklahoma fans and Texas fans are not filing into that Cotton Bowl and losing their minds and hating each other for just a little bit, and not liking someone because they're wearing the opposite color, or loving someone because they wear your colors. That's something that only happens in sports. It only happens in this world, and especially in college football, I've found, where you could be walking past someone on the street in a state that doesn't even have the team, wearing a Tulane jersey, whatever it is, and someone in Washington is going to be able to, shout you out, say, go Tulane or whatever, green wave. It's one of those things that makes college football special, is with colleges, you're there for 4 years, but then you spread out. Then everyone goes all over the place, and they carry that with them. They carry that fandom with them, and it creates for an incredible world around us where we have, Tulane fans in Washington, and we have Texas fans in Maine, and we have Notre Dame fans in Arizona. It's just college football is one of the very few sports, just in general, where you adopt a team for 4 years or 5 years or however long you're there, and they hold for the rest of your life based off one decision that you made when you were 18 years old. And I think that doesn't go away. I guess the best way to put this, all of this, great things we love about the sport, the tailgating, the rivalries that get a little bit heated at times, the energy in that stadium, the fandom, the relationships that you make along the way by being fans of specific teams, none of that's going anywhere. Obviously, there is, answers that need to be made very, very soon. There are big time decisions that need to be come to, but when you look at this sport and you look at where it is right now and what it could be, there's a gap. I'm not going to act like there isn't a gap, but when I look at Saturdays every single year, even last year when a lot of this stuff was changing, and this year obviously will paint a really good picture of what the future will look like, but I have no doubt that the second I wake up on Saturday, I'm not going to be thinking about NIL. I'm not going to be thinking about transfer portals. I'm not going to be thinking about, the House versus NCAA. I'm not going to be worrying about NIL back pay or revenue sharing or all of the different things that are coming at us at a million miles an hour. All of that washes away because there's a 4-hour period where you are in a organized mob of 100,000 people, losing your mind, being emotionally attached, physically attached, mentally attached to this game. And it's what makes this game special. There's nothing about this sport that the things that makes this sport special all happen, within 10 miles of one of those stadiums, whether it's tailgating, whether it's creating new relationships, whether it's, the players on the field, which is the biggest part of this. Is when you watch college football now, everyone wants to, demonize these players and make them out to be, money-hungry guys that only want NIL. But at the very core of all of this, at the center of every single sport across every single country in the world, but college football just feels a little bit more special to me in particular. But at the absolute core of this is just every Saturday we get to go into a stadium and watch, 50 or 100 kids live out their dream on a weekly basis. We get to watch kids, live out moments that they had only dreamed up in their head, and now they're reality. And I think that's gotten lost in all the craziness that has been going on. So I'm going a little bit long here. I got very excited about this segment just because it feels like a lot I've been talking about has been the negatives that are going on around college football and how to fix those. But there's a lot of things that are not broken. There's a lot of things that are still beautiful about this game, and in my eyes, they're still the most important things. So I understand being upset about this stuff. I understand being worried, and I promise you we will get back to our regularly scheduled programming tomorrow with some not so great things that are coming down the road and some big question marks. But the reality is there are really good parts of this game still. Just enjoy those parts. I understand there's a lot of worry on the outside. You can't control that outside stuff. Just enjoy this game for what it is, for the beautiful things that happen on the football field and off the football field for these kids, and just don't let the dysfunction get in the way of you loving what made this sport special in the first place, which is none of the stuff that we're talking about right now. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this develop. I know that there are fans out there that are very nervous about the future of this sport, but man, the bad things in this sport pale in comparison to the beautiful, incredible things in this sport. And I just felt like everyone kind of needed a little bit of a reminder for that. But we'll move on here. We'll take our first break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some scheduling info in the 2024 season. We have some game day sites. We have a full slate for ESPN the first couple of weeks. We have Big Noon Kickoff, Big Ten on CBS for the very first time. Tons of stuff to get to, so stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the good things in college football. Feels like I've been covering all of the things that are changing or all of the confusion and dysfunction around the sport. So I wanted to take a second, just remind you all why this sport is special, why this sport means so much to me, and I'm sure so much to all of you. So felt like that was a good way to start off our show today, but let's jump into some scheduling info. The TV schedules have started to come out. We've started to get more and more of when games are going to be kicked off, what the order is, who has college game day, which is kind of the biggest thing here. It starts in week 0. We have Florida State against Georgia Tech in Ireland on ABC at noon. In fact, I have a graphic for this, so why don't I pull that up real quick. So yeah, we have Florida State versus Georgia Tech in Dublin, which is a very, very fun little wrinkle to this. They're playing at noon Eastern time, which is just kind of the way the things when you play across the sea, you got to play a little bit earlier in the day. This is a very interesting game. I think a lot of people will overlook it because Georgia Tech has not been, a big time team over the last couple of years, but watch those games a year ago. If you have the time, go through Georgia Tech and just take snippets from every single game. You will see that team get progressively better, run that offense progressively more efficiently, and become a team that not only can be, dangerous to these top teams, but can outright just beat them on any given day. So Florida State's got to come ready. All of that stuff has a ton of variables around it that we'll start to unpack as we get closer, but Georgia Tech is no slouch, so I would not show up. I would show up right if I was Florida State. But ESPN dropped a ton of times for week 1 as well, and it's a great slate. It starts on Thursday. We have North Dakota State at Colorado. This is one of the sketchiest games in the year, and Colorado jumps off the board with it because North Dakota State, as we know, has been doing an incredible job at the FCS level for quite some time now. They've won many national titles, have taken a little bit of a dip over the last couple of years, but are still one of the premier programs out there. And one of the things they can do is get after the passer. So if that O-line does not come ready, it could be an ugly day and could start the Colorado season off on the worst possible note. But then you have the Friday slate. You have Temple at Oklahoma on ESPN at 7 p.m. Then you have TCU at Stanford. Not necessarily the most, eye-catching games in the world, but very interesting things to watch here. You have Oklahoma going into their first year in the SEC. I want to see them outright dominate Temple. Win by like 50 points, do things on the defensive side of the ball where you're just imposing your will. They should be able to do that, but if we don't see that aggression from the lines of scrimmage, there's definitely more of a cause to worry. Then you have TCU at Stanford. This is all about just TCU bouncing back from a disappointing 2023 in my mind. It's still Sonny Dykes. It's still that program that went to that title game 2 years ago against Georgia, and they still have that ability, right? It's not like they entirely fell off a cliff. It was just last year they were replacing a lot of guys that were going to be nearly impossible to replace. So I definitely think that'll be a very interesting thing to watch. If they can get that win, it'll be huge. If Stanford can get that win, it's an absolute, it definitely throws a little bit of a wrench into what we think the ACC is going to look like. And then on Saturday, It's an absolute beautiful slate, folks. We have on August 31st, we have Clemson versus Georgia in Atlanta. That is a noon kickoff. I know Georgia fans are not very happy about that one. I think they wanted a little bit more time, wanted that to be at 3:30. But at the end of the day, I fully understand that one. I'm a firm believer of give the best time slots to the ones happening on college campuses, but that's just my preference. Miami at Florida at 3:30 is going to be fascinating. It's one of the most important games for both of these teams throughout the season, and these teams have a lot of important games. But this one is the absolute kickstart. You're beating a team that is going to be a good team, is going to be a team that, at the very least, Florida, we've talked about, might not have the best record at the end of the year, but they're not going to be an easy out either. And then Miami building up to this fantastic year. If they can win in Gainesville, I think it puts a ton of momentum behind them going forward. So that'll be fascinating to watch. You have Colorado State at Texas. Not a ton to unpack here. Colorado State is a very interesting team that could be a little bit dangerous, but Texas should take care of business. It's going to be downright hot though. So whoever handles that a little bit better will probably be the winner. And when you practice in Texas, you're a little bit more equipped to that than when you practice in Colorado. So I think Texas will be more than fine there. Western Kentucky at Bama at 7 p.m. On that Saturday is going to be a fascinating game for one reason in particular, and that's because Western Kentucky is going to throw the ball. That's what they do. They're going to stretch the ball down the field. We saw it with Malachi Corley getting drafted so highly. That doesn't happen until you stretch out the field and, get those guys the ball. So I expect nothing different from Western Kentucky this upcoming year. I think they're going to try to stretch Bama out. I think they know where the weakness is in that back end, and they'll see if they can exploit it. If they can't and Alabama is absolutely locked down, we might have an idea of what Bama's going to look like this year. If they get exposed a couple of times, that Georgia game could look really ugly. And then you get to the big time one of the weekend, Notre Dame heading down to College Station to take on Texas A&M. That is College Game Day. It is at 7:30 kick ABC, so we will have Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on that call. Now, if you were to ask me, I'd probably lean towards Miami at Florida just because of the rivalry there, the energy behind that game, but fully understand why they went this route. Definitely wanted on a college campus, so very happy they didn't go with Clemson, Georgia, when you definitely could make the argument that's the best game on the docket. But at the end of the day, I think you have that atmosphere. The fan base is crazy. I think we can all agree on that. Over there at Texas A&M, they're going to be off the walls. Notre Dame has to win this game to be what they want to be going into this year. It's going to be fascinating to watch that one. And then Kyle Field at nighttime is a very special place. And then you have Sunday, September 1st. You got LSU at USC in Vegas, so not necessarily at USC, but in Las Vegas in Allegiant Stadium, 7:30 kick on ABC. This one is huge for both teams. Whichever defense can make more plays, I feel much more confident in going forward. Obviously, both these offenses are going to be very potent, so don't necessarily expect, a great day from either of these defenses, but whichever one shows a little bit more ability, and one guy in particular I'm watching is Harold Perkins for LSU. If he is utilized the way that he is supposed to be utilized and wasn't a year ago, he's going to make plays, and he's going to be an absolute menace, and he's going to make a lot of people love LSU very quickly. So this one's going to be fascinating. Whoever comes out on top has a ton of momentum. Whoever comes out, on the losing side is asking a lot of questions, that's for sure. And then you have the Monday game that we have started to kind of get comfortable with in week one. It's Boston College at Florida State. So Florida State has a very weird start to their schedule, which we'll actually get to later on when we talk about Florida State, but this game should be relatively a layup. Obviously you have the variable of Florida State coming back from Dublin and how does that affect the practices throughout the week and that type of thing. But I expect Florida State to win. If Bill O'Brien can make a big statement, that would be quite the thing to watch, though. And then you have Big Noon Kickoff. Big Noon Kickoff is one of the big-time shows throughout college football season. It's right up there with College Game Day. In fact, I like to flip back and forth a little bit. I like to kind of play a charcuterie board type of approach to all the pregame shows that we have, but they made their decisions for week 2 and week 3 of the season. They are going to head to Ann Arbor, Michigan for the Texas at Michigan game. That's a layup. That was no question. I think that was always going to be where they ended up. and it's going to be an incredible game. Texas against Michigan in the Big House is about as college football as it gets, so cannot wait for that one. And then in week 3, they're staying in the Big Ten. They're heading to Madison, Wisconsin, where Alabama is taking on Wisconsin. And I think this one is going to be just really interesting to watch more than anything else. Seeing those Bama jerseys in Camp Randall is not something that a lot of people are used to, but it's going to be really interesting to watch that one. Wisconsin could pull off something crazy, but we'll find out. And then at the end of the year, excuse me. At the end of the year, one I forgot to put in here is week 13. They are going to the game. No question. That was always going to be the case. You can expect that to be the game for quite some time to come. And then Big Ten has CBS this year, so they've made a couple of decisions of where they're going to end up on those weekends, who is going to be in, those CBS slots, that coveted 3:30 slot that all the SEC teams were fighting over. In week 3, they are going to West Lafayette, Indiana, Notre Dame at Purdue. This one is honestly a layup because it is Notre Dame going to a Big Ten team. It gives you that ability to, have a big-time name. And also, Purdue at home is no slouch. They are willing to, in the second year under Ryan Walters, they want to take that next step. I think it's still Hudson Card under center for them, so it'll be fascinating to watch this one unfold. If Notre Dame, stumbles in this one, as well as Texas A&M, this season looks a lot different than Notre Dame fans had thought. And then week 4, they go back to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Definitely going to get plenty out of Michigan this upcoming year, but it's USC at Michigan. USC is definitely, it's going to be a fascinating game to watch. I think this is one that we'll talk about here in the next segment about a possible rivalry coming up, but I think it becomes a must-win if Michigan drops the one to Texas. If they drop both of these, there's a lot of people asking questions about Sharon Moore. But we'll continue to get into all of this before it is fully leaked on May 30th, because there's going to be so much to get to at that point. There's going to be a ton of incredible things happening over the first week. I think all of us are very much looking forward to that transition from UGA Clemson to Miami, Florida to Texas A&M Notre Dame. Those 3 games in a row to start off your college football season is about as good as it gets. We are 108 days away from the kickoff of the games, and I just cannot, or 108 days away from week 1, 101 from week 0. So we'll start maybe a countdown at 99 for week 1 and maybe highlight a different player for a couple of minutes at the end of the show, starting at 99 and moving all the way down to 1. But we'll get there when we get there. But it's getting here fast, folks. It's starting to, heat up. We're starting to get more and more, start to plan out your TV schedules and everything like that. And it's getting close. I'm getting excited, so definitely strap in. I'll definitely have all of the updates you guys need to know. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about new rivalries that could be coming through realignment. We are definitely losing some that I wish we weren't, but we're gaining some that are going to be, I think, incredible in the future. I don't include the ones that we're just getting back, like Texas and Texas A&M, but also those play a part in this. But I'll break down some very new ones that we might get this upcoming season right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the scheduling that has come out for the TV networks. We had a full ESPN slate for week 1. We've had a couple of different big noon kickoff and college game day locations released, so wanted to get into all of that. But now it's time for some rivalries, and I think this is something that a lot of people are looking forward to in the new iteration of college football, where you are losing some rivalries. I'm not really sure where Oklahoma State's going to go. I don't know where Oregon State's going to go. So you are going to lose some. There's no two ways about that. You're going to lose some of the games that we've loved so much. But I do think we're going to get some games, some new games into the fold that might just replace those and more. So I want to break those down for you guys. And I think it starts in the SEC. And I'm going to go Georgia against Texas. This is one that, frankly makes me really upset. And I'll be totally honest, I grew up a Texas fan. Both my parents went there, so I am a big time Longhorn fan. The problem is, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and then I attended UGA for my college career, so it's putting me in a bit of a pretzel. But I do think these two programs are going to go at it for the next couple of years, and I think it has a lot to do with just where they are in the grand scheme of things. Georgia and Texas, to me, when I look across the SEC, they're the only ones that I can say are going to be not only good in 2024, but in 5 and 6 and 7. I think they are sustainable. I think they're setting themselves up for success down the road, where Ole Miss, I think, is on the right track, but, relying a little bit heavily on the portal. Bama, you never really know what's going to happen with Kalen DeBoer. Tennessee, all these other, Missouri, everything's a little bit up in the air for them down the road. I think these two teams in particular are set up to be the class of the SEC for quite some time to come, and that means you're going to have some very defining games in the years to come. Obviously, they meet in Austin this upcoming year. I think if you have two undefeated teams walking into that game, you have the number 1 and 2 teams in the country walking into that game. So it'll be fascinating to watch that one unfold. I think there's a ton of energy behind that weekend, not only on the football field, but there's also an F1 race in Austin that weekend. So it's going to be off the walls. But the QB battles also are going to play a part here. You have, obviously, Carson Beck against Quinn Ewers this year. But right after, you got Arch Manning against Jaden Rashada or Gunnar Stockton for the next couple of years. Then maybe Trey Owens takes the helm at Texas, and you have him against Ryan Puglisi. It feels like we're set up for some really, really good quarterback battles where you have two of the best guys in the country playing for two of the best teams in the country, going at it in the best conference in the country, which is what we all want. And on top of all this, you look at both these I am a part of both these fan bases. They are crazy. They are all over the place. They are easy to anger. They take everything to heart. And it's going to create some very intense Twitter battles that I will stay 10,000 feet from, because I have no desire to talk bad about either of these programs. It's going to be a tough time for me, but I expect those two to be battling it out for quite some time and develop quite a bit of animosity for each other. Another one I'm looking at is Oklahoma LSU. I debated between Oklahoma Tennessee here, but to be honest, I'm going to do another segment of this, so I'll probably sneak that one in then. But these two teams have crossed the paths a time or two. Most recently, Oklahoma running into that buzzsaw that was 2019 LSU. Oklahoma just got embarrassed, and they have not forgotten. More importantly, their fans have not forgotten that game. They want to get back and beat LSU. They are playing this season. It's two of the most passionate fan bases in the game. Both are going to be really, really intense. And also, kind of like Texas and Georgia, I view them as the class of the SEC going forward. Oklahoma and LSU I view right in that second tier of teams that could pop up into Atlanta any given year and are definitely fighting to get into that top tier. So I think there's going to be super important games for this one coming down the road that maybe, don't have SEC title implications, but could have playoff implications, and just bragging rights in general are always a fun way to go about this. And then I think zeroing in on this year, Jackson Arnold against Garrett Nussmeier is appointment television. I think there is going to be some energy in that game that it could be a little bit back and forth. Neither team is the most fortified on defense as they would like to be, so maybe we just get some battles. And I think that's one definitely to watch throughout the next couple of years, because I think Oklahoma fans still have a sour taste in their mouth from 2019. And then Oregon versus Ohio State. This is one where they've met a couple of times, but it's kind of like the Texas-Georgia matchup where these teams, in my mind, are going to be the class of the Big Ten moving forward. Now, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, they will have plenty to say about that, USC as well. But at the end of the day, I do think these teams have set themselves up not only for this year, but for next year. And then on top of that, they've met a couple of times in recent history and have had some really, really good games, mainly the national title back in the first playoff in 2014. Ohio State pretty much dismantled Oregon with Cardale Jones and Ezekiel Elliott and that incredible team they had and the incredible run they had. And then Oregon got them the last time they faced off in 2021. So tons going into this. It's going to be incredible to watch this game unfold. I think this is one where you don't necessarily have, the same type of brands as you have across the rest of the Big Ten. I think Michigan, Penn State, they strike me as more, hardworking, blue-collar type brands, where Ohio State and Oregon are a little bit more hoity-toity, a little bit more show and flair, and I think that'll make for some really, really remarkable matchups. I love this matchup. I think it's going to get really, really intense over the next decade or so, not only in the Big Ten, but possibly in the playoff as well. And then you have USC versus Michigan. This is purely based off the style of these two teams. They are two wildly different programs. When you talk about Michigan, you talk about hard-nosed, punch-you-in-the-mouth football. Then when you talk about USC, it's a little bit of flash. It's a little bit finesse and speed and that type of thing. I think those differences in styles not only will make incredible games, but also these fan bases will hate each other because they are very, very different from each other. And I think it'll be an incredible thing to watch. Obviously, USC is trying to adapt a little bit more of that Michigan model, but it's going to take some time, and I think plenty of time for this to develop into a very, very heated rivalry. I do think that this game this year is going to be a little bit closer than some might think. Now, I do expect Michigan to win, but I do think USC is going to be able to kind of put them on the ropes a little bit, start this thing off really well, and I think it's going to be really, really intense on a yearly basis. There's going to be tons of energy, great atmospheres at both places, especially if USC can get it rolling. If they can't get it rolling, maybe not that great of an atmosphere out there, but I expect them to, and I think it's going to be just one of those games where we look back on in a decade and say, man, those teams just hate each other. And then we got Colorado State at Kansas State. To be fair, this is kind of going back to the former Big 12 when Colorado was in it. These teams did not like each other very much, and I don't think they're going to waste much time picking up where they left off this year. I think there will be a lot of animosity around here. This also kind of has that Michigan versus USC vibes, where Kansas State's that hard-nosed team that, is very quiet and goes about their business. Deion Sanders in Colorado likes to talk. They like to tweet. They like to do all that type of thing. Chris Kleiman, not as much. So it's going to be really interesting to watch the juxtaposition of styles, but also just the energy around the programs. And then I think this one is very interesting, partly because Colorado has a ton riding on these next couple of years. Going into the Big 12, it's a more attackable conference, but at the end of the day, you are going to be fighting teams like Kansas State, like Utah, like Kansas in this battle for being where you want to be in this conference. And I think it's one of those things that will make Colorado even more of a player in this conference. Now, it could go the other direction, and Kansas State could not have to worry about them, but I think it's going to be a lot of aggression coming in the not so near future with that matchup. But I think there's going to be incredible ones that I hadn't even broken down yet that I probably will get to sometime, probably next week. But there's other ones that are coming back. We have A&M against Texas, Texas against Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Utah, BYU. All of these games are now conference games, and it's a beautiful thing. Obviously, there are negatives to conference realignment, but getting back some of these games and adding some of the rivalries I just talked about is a plus that I can absolutely get on board with. So it's going to be really fun to watch. Cannot wait to see those develop. But we're going to take our third break here. I accidentally pressed the third break when I meant the second break, but we're going to take our third break here and use the second break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a spring overreactions. We'll get back into the Big 12. Did one segment a little bit earlier in the week, I believe on Monday, and then we're going to get into Oklahoma State, Kansas, Colorado, and Baylor today. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the new rivalries I think that'll pop up through realignment. Some ones like Georgia, Texas, like Oklahoma against LSU, Oregon, Ohio State. I think some of those will become some big time rivalries over the next couple of years. But let's jump into some spring overreactions. We got into the Big 12 a little bit earlier in the week. We definitely jumped into Arizona, into Utah, Kansas State, and I believe Texas Tech was the fourth one. Now we have Oklahoma State, Kansas, Colorado, and Baylor for you today. But let's jump into Oklahoma State to start off, and every single year we fall into this trap. Flashback to last year, we were sitting here talking about Texas and OU and Kansas State, and not much about Oklahoma State. And then they went on to beat most of those teams on that list and then face Texas in Arlington before falling in the Big 12 championship. That is what they're capable of. That is what they do under Mike Gundy. They absolutely make everyone look stupid every single year. Now, back in the present, talking about this upcoming year, I've been talking about Arizona and Utah and Kansas State and Kansas and not so much Oklahoma State. Well, I think Mike Gundy's going to make me eat my words again. Because at the end of the day, Mike Gundy loves this. He wants to be this team. He wants to be the team that no one talks about, that lets them go off and do their business and come out and have one of the best football teams you've seen with the talent that they currently have. They'll have one of the best offensive lines in the country, returning for the number 4 returning production in the entire country. So a lot of really good things about this team. But we get a little bit infatuated with Utah coming over, and we get a little bit infatuated with Avery Johnson at quarterback for Kansas State. And frankly, I fall victim to that too. But at the end of the day, Oklahoma State just continues to prove everyone wrong every single year. And I think they could do it again this year and possibly find themselves right back in Arlington where no one expects them to be right now. But let's move on to Kansas and let's talk about Jalen Daniels. This kid is so good, and I think people have slightly forgotten that with all the injuries and things that have gone on with him. But to start 2022, this guy was the story of college football. They started 5-0. He was putting up crazy numbers, doing incredible things. At the end of that year, against Arkansas, he put up 5 touchdowns in that game. He was just an all-time performance for that little stretch, and then got injured, had some different troubles that definitely hampered that year. But as you remember, during that 5-week stretch, there were a lot of people yelling Heisman for this kid because not only was he, playing at an incredibly high level, but he was their offense. He was everything to them for quite some time during that year, and he played a huge part in what they were capable of doing throughout the year. And I think as long as you can keep him healthy, the sky's the limit for this kid. This kid can do anything that is on the table for any college athlete out there. So he's someone that you got to stay healthy. Obviously, that is something that is easier said than done, especially with someone that has had the history that he has had. But at the end of the day, he can do incredible things when he's on the field. And when he's on the field, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. He's one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the entire country. So I'm not saying he's going to be winning I'm not saying he's going to be winning the Heisman. I'm not saying he's going to be doing anything like crazy for Kansas this year, but let's just say Kansas puts together a really nice year, goes to the Big 12 championship, and Jalen Daniels is healthy throughout that whole thing. He's going to have some numbers that people are going to look at and say, why is this guy not in these Heisman conversations? Why is this guy not getting more love? Now, the schedule is very manageable. There's moments for him to have big-time matchups against big-time opponents at home and on the road. But at the end of the day, they have the ability to win all of those games. If they can capitalize on this moment and this kid can play to his potential, there will be people that will be talking about his Heisman. Now, some of them might be wearing Kansas Jayhawk uniforms, but at the end of the day, this kid is special and absolutely can take the world by storm this upcoming year. But let's get into Colorado, the most crazy team out there by a comfortable margin right now. And my take overall from their spring was just the outside noise is going to be too much for this team. When I look at this team this year compared to last year, from a roster perspective, it is not even close. They are light years better than they were a year ago. On both lines of scrimmage, at pretty much every position, they have upgraded their talent level and their ability at those positions. That's half the battle, right? That's scraping the bottom of the barrel for, what you absolutely need to compete. Now you got to get everything else in place, and it's far from being in place to my eyes. I thought that once we got into the second year and once he had a little bit more talent and kind of had his team a little bit more, a lot of this stuff would start to kind of go away, and I was entirely wrong. I think he is leaning into it a little bit more than I would like, and obviously he has addressed this. He said he should not have gotten involved in the Twitter feud that he did get involved in, and maybe he will learn from that and continue forward, but as of right now, where we stand, I don't necessarily have a ton of confidence in him to block out that noise and not encourage it and not engage in it. So if they lose at Nebraska, or God forbid if they lose to North Dakota State, the outside noise is going to be loud, it's going to be aggressive, and there's going to be people that want you to lose. Plain and simple. There are people in media and around college football that just don't like Deion, that just don't like Colorado, and they're going to enjoy watching you lose. Can you let that be outside your building and make everything inside your building the same? Is the biggest question mark in the world in college football right now for Colorado. If I were to ask one question about one team, it's that. Can Colorado handle all the craziness that is around their program, especially when they drop a couple? When I look at this roster, they can win 8 or 9 games. They can do incredible things. They can compete for the Big 12 in the perfect world. But I see them closer to 6 or 7 wins. I see them as a team that loses a couple early and gets overwhelmed by a couple of physical teams and then just starts to slowly fall apart at the seams. I hope that's not the case. I really want to see Colorado succeed to the level they're capable of this year, but they're just making it a lot harder on themselves than they need to. So it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. I get more and more worried about Colorado as they get better and better from a talent perspective, which is a weird feeling, but that's where we are with Colorado right now. But then let's get into Baylor, and let's talk about Daquan Finn. This dude is going to be awesome, and you might not know the name. He came over from Toledo to be the quarterback at Baylor this upcoming year, and I think he has the ability to make an all Big 12 team. Now, that is a very tall order because in the Big 12, you have dudes at quarterback. You have Noah Fafita, Cedar Sanders, Cam Rising, Jalen Daniels we just talked about, Avery Johnson, Garrett Green. All of those guys are really incredible and likely above on the pecking order than Daquan Finn, but they have something, or Daquan Finn has something that those guys don't, which is his team needs him, and needs him in the worst possible way. He is going to be the offense for this team alone at some points this season. He is someone that has played a ton of football, has played 5 seasons over at Toledo, had 2,600 yards passing a year ago with 22 touchdowns, had a 2.5 to 1 TD INT ratio, added 500 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, which gives you an idea of what he can be to that offense, where when the passing game's not working quite as well, he can go create on his own and be an entire offense by himself. I think he's not going to be talked about. I think they might not win, a ton of games, but if they can put together an 8-4 season, he's going to put together a crazy number season. And I think although you have these incredible quarterbacks across the board in the Big 12, excuse me, I think you might have a tough time keeping Daquan Finn out of that conversation, because this kid is going to transform that offense and do things that are going to make your jaw drop a couple of times. But there's tons going into this Big 12 season. It is one of the most competitive conferences in the entire country. I think the most competitive of the Power 5 by a fairly comfortable margin. So it's going to be remarkable to watch this conference. We'll probably have another one of these spring overreactions on Friday, because there's a couple of teams I definitely wanted to get to before we wrap this thing up. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Florida State, get into a little bit of a Spotlight Wednesday, a ton riding on this year. DJ Uiagalelei has about as much pressure on him as anyone in the country. So I want to break down all of that right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just got to some spring overreactions from the Big 12. Definitely a ton going into that conference this year, a very, very competitive conference. So I wanted to break that down for you guys, but let's talk about the Florida State Seminoles. There is a ton going into this season. As much pressure on any team in the country, barring Ohio State, I think, is Florida State, because you talk about the way that last season ended, you get snubbed from the playoffs, you have a big stink in pretty much every media outlet there possibly was, and then you get dog walked by Georgia, and it makes you look a little bit less, have a little bit less of a leg to stand on. It makes a lot of people make fun of you. I'll put it that way. Definitely a lot of people taking some shots at Florida State. How they respond this year is going to be huge. But let's jump into all of this stuff and kind of get into what this year is going to mean for Florida State. And we'll start the way we always start, with the offense. We'll go to the defense, then we'll jump into the schedule, and then I'll give my final thoughts at the end. The offense is all about transfer portal guys. When you look across the offensive line, you have Terrence Ferguson coming over from Bama at left guard, and then you have Richie Leonard coming over from Florida at right guard. Both those guys have to be big time. They're very good players, very talented, but they're going to need to be able to run the ball with this team, and if they can't, it's going to be a really, really long year. So those guys on the interior are hugely important. Now, the running game is going to be tough to defend because you have tons of dudes. Roydell Williams, another Bama transfer, is going to be a big part of this team. And then you have Lawrence Tuafili, who played a big part down the stretch of last season. Jalen Lucas is getting incredible rave reviews coming out of spring, so he's someone that's going to be really hard to keep off the field. And then we get to the wide receiver group, which is good. I don't think it is near what it was a year ago with Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. Both those guys just incredible athletes. But you do have some dudes that are ready to step up. Jalen Lucas is a running back, but he can absolutely be used in the pass game. Then you have guys like Malik Benson, another Bama transfer that came over, who's had a really good spring. Did get hurt in the spring game, I believe. Haven't heard an update on how he's doing, but should be okay to go when we get into fall camp. You have guys like Hakeem Williams, Ja'Kai Douglas that absolutely need to make that next step. The wide receiver room is talented, but it's definitely not at the level where you want it to be for Florida State. So a little bit of a worry there, but I think they'll be able to put it together. Mike Norvell does a great job of putting his wide receivers in advantageous situations and just getting outright athletes that can go make any type of play you need them to make. But when we talk about this offense, it's all about that guy right there. It's all about DJ Uiagalelei. He is the biggest unknown maybe in college football right now. And that sounds crazy to say, but when you talk about this season for Florida State, they just came off an undefeated season, a season where they thought they should have been in the playoff. They won the ACC. They did a ton of things that they hadn't done in quite some time. They're going into this year with as much pressure as anyone in the country, because when you look at what they need to do to keep that standard up, they need to be in the playoff. They need to compete for the ACC and possibly win the ACC this upcoming year, and DJ is the piece that is going to make that happen. If he plays the same way he played at Clemson and at Oregon State, they're not going to win the ACC. I'll put it very bluntly. If he is as inconsistent and as inaccurate as he was at those past places, they're not going to be successful, at least not to the degree that they want to be. Now, he had a good spring. He is starting to make those strides, and they feel very confident in him. But there is a big-time worry about his consistency, about his accuracy, about his ability to just be the quarterback they need him to be. Now, if he takes advantage of this situation, takes that next step, becomes more accurate, they're a playoff team, and they're right back where they want to be. But at the end of the day, there is a lot riding on that kid's shoulders, and if he cannot execute, it's going to be a tough year for Florida State that a lot of people are not expecting. Now, one of the good things about this is the defense is downright nasty, pretty much top to bottom. The D-line is awesome. You talk about Joshua Farmer and Dale Jackson holding it down on the inside, Marvin Jones and Patrick Payton, the guy that just went off screen there, holding it down as the edge rushers, and that's going to be the scary part of this team. DJ Lundy is a linebacker, but he's going to play a huge part in their pass rushing game. They are going to get to the quarterback, and they're going to get the quarterback on the ground. If they can get a little bit more push on the interior with some guys stepping in for Braden Fisk and guys of that nature, then they're going to be really, really successful. Now, a pass rush without interior push can be a little bit sketchy at times, especially if you're dealing with a mobile quarterback that can get out of one tackle and really hurt you down the field. It gets a little bit more sketchy, but I think they'll be more than fine on the defensive line. The linebacker group is really solid. DJ Lundy is the guy there. He'll be kind of a pass rushing role, but we'll drop back into coverage. We'll do a ton of stuff for them this upcoming year. Getting Cam Riley to come over from North Carolina State in the spring cycle is a huge pickup for them. Gives that a ton of stability in that position. And then you have Sean Murphy and Omar Graham Jr., both guys that are transfers coming in that are going to have to play big-time roles this upcoming year. And then you have the back end, and it is outright for real. It is awesome. You have Fentrell Cypress that is kind of leading the way. Probably will be their cornerback one, if I'm being totally honest. You have Azariah Thomas, who had an incredible spring. Saheem Brown is ready to take that next step and become one of the best DBs in the entire ACC. Earl Little coming in. Devontae Brown also coming in from the portal. All these guys are going to play big-time roles for them. And this group is likely going to be the best, if not one of the best, in the entire ACC and in the entire country. They have tons of ability, tons of athleticism, and when you have the pass rush that I expect them to have, it's going to be tough to defend this team. There's no two ways about that. So really like this team overall. They're pretty much in a relatively similar position they were, in last year, but the big question mark is that quarterback where you don't have Jordan Travis. You have DJ, who is a little bit less dynamic, is a little bit less accurate, is just a little bit lower than Travis on some of the things that you need him to be better at. But let's jump into the schedule and kind of break down what that looks like. I think that starting little bit is going to be tougher than some people give it credit for. Overall, it's a very weird schedule just in general. You start on week 0, so you have 3 byes. You play on, a Friday. You play on a Monday. So, they bounce around a lot, and it's going to be a very, very interesting year for them. But it starts in Ireland with Georgia Tech. I've talked about that game. It is a little bit more sketchy than people are giving it credit for, but then they fly back and play Boston College on a Monday, and both those games should be wins. On paper, they beat those teams probably 10 times out of 10, but there are a lot of other variables that are coming into play here, and I think it's going to be sketchier getting through those than people expect. But at the end of the day, if they do get through those unscathed, they do have a bye, and then you play a very sneaky Memphis team that is building up a very, very good roster over there, and they should be okay, but that one's sketchy as well. And then you get into ACC play again with, you have 2 to start the year, which is a weird little wrinkle there as well. But then you have Cal and SMU, 2 new teams. Cal at home and then at SMU are super important games. They definitely need to get wins there because the game right after is at Clemson. So you definitely need to get your stuff together, or Clemson at home, excuse me. You definitely need to make sure you're ready to roll. If you go 0-3 there, you are on track to win the ACC. You are right where you need to be, and you are the Florida State that you expected to be coming into this year. But it doesn't necessarily get easier from that point on. You are at Duke on a Friday, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do, at Miami, and then you have North Carolina at home, at Notre Dame, which is going to be a really, really tough one. So they don't necessarily get a bunch of breaks. They do right after that. They do get a bye and then a layup against Charleston Southern. But as you can see throughout this entire roster, there's really not a chance for them to just breathe, for them to, take a layup, move on to the next week, and just kind of keep it rolling. Charleston Southern is as close as you get, and that's at the end of this grind of a schedule. So if they can get to that point undefeated, I expect them to go undefeated the entire year. I tend to expect them to not be undefeated at that point. Now, I don't know what that looks like. Is it 10-2? Is it 9-3? Is it 11-1? I'm not exactly sure, but I do think there are a couple of games in there that there's just too many games that are up in the air. Some are more up in the air than others. Clemson, Notre Dame, and Miami are obviously the games to really watch, but then North Carolina is a tough one. At Duke is sketchy. Georgia Tech and Dublin we've talked about. At SMU is a really weird one. So I don't think there's an easy game necessarily on here outside of Charleston Southern. But final thoughts overall, the defense is going to carry this team at times. They're just going to have to. It's just kind of the way of the world, especially when you lose guys like Jordan Travis, like Keon Coleman, like Trey Benson at the running back position. So there's going to be a ton on the shoulder of this defense. Now, that doesn't mean that DJ doesn't have to meet him halfway, because he has to be in a position to succeed, and Mike Norvell does an incredible job with that when you talk about what he's done with some quarterbacks in the past. But DJ is a little bit more of a project than why am I blanking on his name? Than Jordan Travis was. I just said it. But DJ will definitely be under a microscope because of the incredible quarterback play they got a year ago, and because they want to be the team in the ACC. They want to assert that dominance this year where you win 2 in a row and you are the class of the ACC going forward. It's going to be a tightrope walk. DJ has not played the level of football to win the ACC or win a conference to this point. So you're going to need him to hit another level. He definitely can do that, especially with Mike Norvell and the group they have around him, but it's going to be tough. The schedule is really tough. There isn't really a break, some weird atmospheres, some tough matchups, some weird nights to be playing on. It's going to be tough. Maybe you have a layup at Cal. You definitely have one at Charleston Southern, but other than that, it's a grind. So this team has a lot more variability than I think some people think. I think some people think the bottoming out is 9-3 or 8-4. It could get more ugly than that, depending on how poorly this DJ experiment goes. But to be honest, I expect it to go much better than it has in his past 2 stops. I expect him to raise his level of play. How much he needs to raise it is a big question mark to me, but we'll find out, I suppose. I think one of the big things going into this year for Florida State in particular is you got to play with some anger. Play with that chip on your shoulder. Play angry, because in your eyes, you got screwed last year. You got left out of the playoff, and you absolutely should have been in. So play with that anger. Embrace that hate. Embrace people, saying you didn't belong and you got boat raced by Georgia. All of that. Bottle it up. Bring it onto the field on Saturdays in the fall, and I think you'll have a very successful 2024. So Florida State's a fascinating team coming off an incredible year that could take a massive step forward and plant their flag in the ACC, could take a slight step back and have a lot of people in Tallahassee questioning what this program is going to look like in the future. So a lot riding on this year, I guess is the best way to put that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us here at the network. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates. You can follow pretty much every social page, and you'll get everything you need to know across every sport you could possibly want. We have incredible people doing work every single day to make sure you guys are fully up to date. So come on over to GSMC and we have you fully covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.